Hello upgraders, it's Will here and I hope you're all doing well. On this show we have Dr Terry Wahls. This is a re-upload and an edit of a podcast we did when we were called the Upgraded Ape Podcast before the rebrand into the Upgraded Ape Show. But I just had to re-put it up there because it's an absolutely fascinating talk with Dr Terry Wahls. She's a clinical professor of medicine, an author and a clinical researcher. And her story is absolutely fascinating. She turned around secondary progressive multiple sclerosis and essentially went from relying on a wheelchair day to day to completing an 18-mile bicycle tour. We talk about how to turbocharge your mitochondrial function, which will in turn improve your brain power and mental energy, which is obviously something we're super keen on at Upgraded Ape. Just a quick note before we dive into the interview itself. We sold out of the 60-day planners yesterday, so thank you for everyone that's placed an order and they'll be with you within the next couple of days. We've got a new order of 60-day plans on the way to us, so that'll be here the next couple of days, hopefully, if all the printing goes fine. And yeah, thanks again. If you didn't catch the show yesterday, I just talked very briefly about a planning system and part of the Get More Done system that we have over at upgradedape.com in the store. It's a 60-day planner. It's a big old thick book that will last you 60 days and will help you achieve 4 goals over those 60 days, and then it helps you plan your day around them. I created it for myself and based it around clinical evidence of what forms habits and how successful people get things done. Quick example is at the end of every day there's a little box to put today's success story. So even if you think you've had a really crappy day, there's likely something that's gone right. And by ending your day on a positive, by just scribbling down what yesterday's success story was, or what today's success story was at the end of the day, you can end the day on a high and go to sleep and not be stressed and not be thinking about all the stuff that maybe you should have done. There's also a reminder to write down tomorrow's goals the evening before. And I find that's mega useful, that when I get up and I'm kind of like blah in the morning, you can just sit down with your cup of coffee and just get going and crack on. So I find the most productive and the most focused hours of the day are when I first sit down in the morning. So yeah, if you fancy one of these planners, go to upgradedape.com, go to the store and they're available there. If they're sold out, either drop me an email and I'll reserve you one at will@upgradedape.com, or just check back in a couple of days and we're continually buying in new stock just because they're selling out so fast. So yeah, thanks again. If you've bought one, let me know how it goes and let's dive into today's show. Hi guys, it's Will here and welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show. Upgrade your brain, get more done, kick life's ass. Hi Terry and welcome to the Upgraded Ape Podcast.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
Can you just start off by painting a very quick picture of your story and your history of MS and where you are now? Because it's an incredible and fascinating story.
In 2000, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis on the basis of a history of optic neuritis 13 years earlier, a new problem with my left leg, lesions in my spinal cord, and abnormal spinal fluid. And I knew the science within 10 years of diagnosis. 1/3 will have difficulty walking, needing a cane, walker, or wheelchair, and 1/2 will be unable to work. I had 2 young children at the time. I was the main breadwinner for our family, and so I decided to treat my disease aggressively. I went to the Cleveland Clinic, an internationally recognized MS center, saw the best people, took the newest drugs. Still within 3 years of diagnosis, my disease had transitioned to secondary progressive MS, and that's the phase where there's no more remissions. Functions once lost are gone forever. And so I took the recommended chemotherapy. I got a tilt-recline wheelchair, and I even took the miracle drug Tizabri, but continued to decline. And that's when I decided I needed to read the science myself. I discovered Dr. Lauren Cardane, went on a paleo diet. After 20 years of being a vegetarian, continued to decline. I started reading the basic animal science, the animal studies for MS and other progressive brain disorders. I found studies involving vitamins and supplements, which had protected those mouse brains. I translated those mouse-sized doses into human-sized doses and began self-experimenting. The speed of my decline slowed. I was very grateful, but I was still declining. So I continued reading. I discovered electrical stimulation of muscles in the summer of 2007. I added that. And I may have had very slight improvement in strength. I then discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine and took their course Neuroprotection, a functional medicine approach for common and uncommon neurologic syndromes. I had a much longer list of vitamins and supplements, which I took. Then I had a very important insight, and that was rather than just relying on supplements, I should figure out where these nutrients were in the food and get them from the food. So now I redesigned my paleo diet to maximize the intake of those key vitamins, minerals, essential fats, and there were over 20. And that really is when I had this new, still paleo-based diet. That's when the magic happened. Within 3 months, my fatigue was gone. I was able to stop Provigil, the medication I'd used for 5 years for MS-related fatigue. At 6 months, I was able to walk throughout the hospital without a cane, and my neurologist agreed that I could taper and then discontinue my disease-modifying drugs. And at 12 months, I had recovered enough that I was back to biking and completed an 18-mile bike tour with my family. And so this really transformed my understanding of disease and health. It transformed how I practiced medicine. I started using functional medicine in my clinical practice. And then I changed my research program, and I now study diet and lifestyle as a treatment for either traumatic brain injury or for multiple sclerosis. And we have several trials that are ongoing with very exciting results, and we have had our first paper recently published.
My first question there, Terry, is when you were at the Cleveland Clinic, were anything other than drugs, were these supplements, was the electric stim, or even food and paleo discussed, or did you gather that yourself from literally just diving into the literature?
So in 2002, my neurologist suggested that I check out the work of Dr. Ashton Embry, and that he had a nonprofit direct MS charity out of Canada that was interested in nutrition and MS. So I went home, looked at that website, and it was through Dr. Embry that I discovered Dr. Lauren Cordain and got on the paleo diet. That was in 2002. I continued to decline, so the paleo diet by itself was not enough to lead to my recovery. Everything else, I really had to discover myself, reading the science. I was doing it in the midst of MS brain fog, so this was a lot of work. I ended up reteaching myself a lot of basic brain biology, biochem, immunology, and then started reading the basic science studies. I was clearly going downhill. It was very clear that the trajectory was going to take me into a bedridden and demented life. So I was highly motivated.
The paleo diet and the work you've done is something that really excites me. I think a lot of people get lost in the Paleolithic diet of you only eating things that perhaps we were understood to have eaten back in that time, that era. How much room do you think that there is there for paleo to become less paleo and more the optimal diet for just human beings?
Well, I think all of us are trying to define what is that optimal diet and how do we help people create those optimal diets for themselves within their cultural context and their locality. Yeah, because I know a lot of people, when they first get introduced to paleo, they hear the message of you can't eat, and then you insert some foods, dairy, legumes, soy, you might insert nightshades, and a variety of other things you can't have. And then you get to eat meat and vegetables, and what they hear is eat lots of meat, and that seems to be where a lot of people stop, is they're going to eat meat and quit everything else. That's not nutritionally sound, and there's not been enough emphasis on how you construct that paleo diet to maximize your micronutrients. Because we had thousands and thousands of different localities and hunter-gatherer societies that all figured out how to maximize their micronutrients based on the available foodstuffs in their season and in their locality. And so my perspective is I use science to tell me what are the micronutrient markers I need to follow to make sure I'm maximizing that micronutrient density. And now I'm tracking 31. So when I create my food rules, well, I then create a menu using those food rules, and my research dietitians enter those menus and recipes into our database, and we see how well am I doing on hitting those 31 key vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fats. And if I'm not hitting them the way I think, then I adjust my rules until we get a way that we can consistently exceed the RDAs for those things that science tells me my brain cells need.
And when you say RDA, do you mean what the government has put out, both in the States and the UK, or are there different levels that people should be trying to hit?
And, in my book, I talk about the limits with the RDA. The recommended daily allowance that many governments use is that level that prevents a vitamin-deficient disease state. It's not the level that creates optimal health. It's simply the level that keeps you developing an acute disease state from deficiency of that particular nutrient. Because the studies of nutritional intake of the traditional societies show that the RDAs, the intake of the various nutrients is 2 to 10-fold the RDAs. My thinking is likely that's the real level for optimal health, is what these traditional societies have figured out in terms of how they're constructing their diets. So I was trying to mirror that level of intensity when I was creating my food plans. And, in the Caltons did a wonderful study looking at the nutrient density of the paleo diet, Atkins, South Beach, American Heart, American Diabetic Association, and the USDA My Healthy Plate. And what they showed was the paleo diets were among the most nutrient dense, but they still missed 40% of the RDAs. And I think that's because there's not enough structure or guidance, and people are hearing too clearly eat meat. And they weren't doing nearly enough vegetables and nearly enough organ meats.
Okay. If we are eating the paleo diet and we're eating lots of veg, lots of organ meats,
yes,
is there anything else that we need, for example, omega-3 fatty acids? Can we get enough of them from diet alone, or is there anything that you really need to supplement with?
We need seaweed to get the iodine, selenium, trace minerals. So I think seaweed and the sea salts are very helpful. The question about your fat ratios, all of our cells are wrapped in cell membranes, which require saturated fat, cholesterol, omega-3 fats, omega-6 fats. Because of the strong use of vegetable oils, most of us are skewed far too heavily to the omega-6 fats. So ideally, what you do is you get rid of the seed oils, use only saturated animal fats or coconut fat for your cooking. And yes, you can have sprouted nuts and seeds. That'll give you plenty of the omega-6. Grass-fed meat, wild fish will give you the omega-3. If you supplement with omega-3s, it's probably wise to also supplement with butter oils that have had the casein removed so that you keep that ratio omega-3 to omega-6 fat in appropriate balance. Because it's harmful to be skewed way to omega-6. You get a different set of harms if you're skewed too strongly to omega-3.
Well, just on that, I think you might have touched on myelin there. I want to dive into that, maybe nerd out a little bit on it, of what it is. We touched on how it gets damaged, how we can improve it over time, and so what it does essentially and why we should be worried about it.
So myelin is the insulation on the wiring between brain cells. And what it is lots and lots of thicknesses of cell membranes. So this is a very fat-rich coating. It requires a lot of cholesterol, saturated fat, omega-3 fat, and omega-6 fat. Most Americans, and probably most folks in the UK, are low on the omega-3. And because we've gotten so crazy about lowering cholesterol and saturated fat, now many people are also getting low on cholesterol and saturated fat. So their membranes, and therefore their myelin, is compromised. And people with MS, we know that we have problems with our myelin. Sadly, most neurologists are not making sure that the person has the building blocks that are needed to produce myelin, because the body is trying to repair that myelin. And the limitations are often that you don't have the building blocks that are necessary for that repair work.
So these are things like B vitamins and things along those lines?
B vitamins, iodine, omega-3 fat, omega-6 fat, saturated fat, cholesterol.
Excellent. Well, something else that you touch on is your mitochondria. Again, can you tell us a little bit about what they are and how they affect you, and then leading on to how can we improve them?
Well, about 1.5 billion years ago, the Earth came covered with this terrible poison that really wiped out the vast majority of life at that time. And that poison was oxygen. There were a few bacteria that were able to utilize this oxygen and more effectively generate adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, the energy our cells use to drive the other chemistry that runs our biology in our life. These ancient bacteria that were using the oxygen effectively got engulfed by bigger bacteria, and that symbiotic relationship worked out extremely well. And so this new organism continued to thrive, and it would ultimately become the forerunners of all animals, and ultimately the forerunners of primates and therefore us. All of our cells have these ancient bacteria in them generating energy for the cell. And the cells that need the most energy, our brain cells, our retina cells, and our heart cells, can have up to 10,000 of these ancient bacteria, our mitochondria, generating the energy for that cell. In medical school, we had to memorize probably hundreds of reactions involving mitochondria, but I never really got formally taught what we had to feed the mitochondria to make sure all those reactions could happen properly. You know, I talk about that a lot in the book, and it comes down to B vitamins, minerals, a lot of fats, so you have good, healthy membranes, and plenty of antioxidants. And when I created my diet, I focused on what were the nutritional requirements for the mitochondria and what were the nutritional requirements for brain cells. And so we made sure the diet was going to have abundant supply for both those two cell types.
And can you dive into just a little bit more about the biochemistry of mitochondria in the actual cell? And feel free to get nerdy with it.
Sure. So some of the advantages that we have is that our mitochondria is what we call metabolically flexible. It can burn either sugar, amino acids, or fat. And that has allowed us to survive famine, to survive winter, and to survive periods of extreme calorie absence. So we can burn fat. For, hundreds, probably thousands of generations, you really couldn't get plant material. Once you got outside of equatorial Africa, we had to deal with winters. And so it was helpful that we could metabolize fat or protein, which would have been the only sources of calories for many months out of each year. The fat, sugar, protein, or amino acids enter the citric acid cycle, go through a variety of steps, which are facilitated by various B vitamins and magnesium, zinc, sulfur, in terms of the minerals. And at each step of the way, you'll generate some protons, and electrons are moved outside of the cell. The protons are then moved into the electron transport chain, where they will go through, again, a series of steps that will create a molecular windmill, adds a phosphate group to the adenosine diphosphate to make it into adenosine triphosphate, which stores a lot of energy, which can then be used to help support all the other biochemistry that needs to happen in our cells. As we mature, particularly over the age of 50, we become less efficient at making some of the proteins that are involved in this step. And one of the compounds that's very important is ubiquinol, or coenzyme Q. And it gets harder and harder to make that after the age of 50. Because of our love of suppressing cholesterol, we're very interested in getting more and more people on this statin classification of drugs, which do suppress inflammation, but they also suppress the body's ability to make ubiquinone or coenzyme Q. And that can lead to muscle pain, muscle fatigue, heart failure, brain fog, decreasing mental clarity, early Alzheimer's. I have huge concerns with people who are taking statins because of the adverse effect on mitochondria.
What you're saying is, and this is shock and horror to everyone listening, cholesterol isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, the studies that look at cholesterol is the cause of heart attacks. Well, that happened from Alan Key's work when they saw during World War II and World War I, there was a sharp decline in heart attack and stroke risk. And his interpretation of the data was that this was because of the restricted availability of eggs and butter. And then the scientific authorities funded some studies looking at that, The vegetable oil industry was very keen to provide a lot of funding to support that because they wanted to replace butter. And soon this became the accepted dogma. Now, we did have some problems in that people with normal cholesterols had heart attacks. And so then they began to say, well, the problem really is the HDL cholesterol level and the LDL cholesterol level, that the HDL is protective and the LDL is harmful. Well, then they had to come to terms with people having heart attacks who had high HDLs and low LDLs. Then they came around and saying, well, it's the particle number and the particle size. And so we keep trying to better define, because with every definition, we're still finding that there are people who are having strokes and heart attacks who have normal, healthy, whether it be cholesterol or normal, healthy HDL or normal, healthy particle size. There's another interpretation of cholesterol risk that is gaining much more traction, and that is that this is an inflammatory disease. It's being studied now as an autoimmune disease, that there are 38 discrete steps involved in the creation of atherosclerotic plaque or narrowing, and they all begin with oxidized or glycated cholesterol molecules that got damaged because of excessive free radicals in the bloodstream, excessive blood sugar in the bloodstream, or the presence of bacterial and viral particles, because the cholesterol is involved in the immune pathways. And when these bacteria and viral particles get on the cholesterol molecule, carrier molecule, they become very inflammatory. So more and more of us are recognizing that the big problem is too much sugar in the diet, not enough vegetables, and chronic infections. Chronic infections are dramatically up because of the terrible nutritional status of people and the inadequate vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is very important to our immune cells and our ability to make antimicrobial peptides, which are a very helpful tool in defeating bacterial and viral infections.
I'm actually doing a blog post on vitamin D at the moment, and it's absolutely incredible the amount of genes that it actually affects and the different processes it affects. And especially over in the UK when there's no sunshine to get it anyway.
900 genes. First it was like 100 genes, then it got up to 200. The most recent information I read implicated 900 genes. Every aspect of your environment, my environment, speaks to my genes. Every aspect. The food, the toxins, my exercise level, my vitamin D status, my social networks, all of those things are interacting with my genes, turning genes on, turning others off, either moving me towards that healthy, wild phenotype that's disease-resistant or towards that inflamed, sickly, disease-prone phenotype. And we've been so focused on drugs, we forgot that the most powerful thing we can do is to help people get back to that wild, healthy, disease-resistant phenotype.
How long do you think it'll be before the standard recommendation from a GP for high cholesterol is something like a statin? How long do you think it'll be, or do you think it'll ever happen, that a GP will recommend diets, supplements, or taking the patient to take things into their own hands?
I think the patients, the public, will race far ahead of the medical establishment because of the power of the internet. People can now blog, write posts, we can do social media, and we can talk about, I had diseases XYZ, I discovered ancestral eating patterns, meditation, exercise, I did these diet and lifestyle things, and my health was radically transformed. Because of the power of the fact that we can all publish now through our Facebook posts, our social media, we can self-publish, and we have standard publications. So the public is getting into this more quickly. We can also go to sites like PubMed, and if you're diligent, you want to be a biohacker for yourself, you can begin reading and deciding yourself what you think about these recommendations. And for the physicians, the government used to fund a lot of medical education. We fund less and less of it. The pharmaceutical industry funds more and more research. And the pharmaceutical industry has learned, as has the food industry, learned how to buy their way onto these treatment guideline panels. and they can influence fully funding researchers and then facilitating getting those researchers who are fully funded by the food industry and or the pharmaceutical industry onto these guideline panels that will then have a biased view as they look at the research, in that they're much more interested in pharmaceutical approaches as opposed to diet and lifestyle approaches. So it becomes increasingly difficult for us to mitigate the very powerful influences of pharmaceuticals on government policy, on the agencies that regulate and approve drug programs, diet programs. I mean, for example, for me to get FDA approval to say the Wahls diet's good for any condition, I have to do 2 clinical trials, multi-center, that show favorable results per disease state that I want to treat. So that's about $8 million that it would cost for me to say the Wahls, to even contemplate beginning the application for FDA approval. That's why it's going to be very hard for, and there is no study that has applied for FDA approval. And I'm sure the same thing is happening in the UK. Pharmaceuticals will have that financial incentive, and the government's not funding those kind of studies to approve dietary interventions.
And do you think that the drugs companies have engineered it that way, that it's harder for someone like yourself to break into and to make those kind of claims and statements backed up by the FDA? Or do you think that the FDA have allowed it to get that way just to stop anyone coming in and doing the studies?
Well, I'm sure it was all in the intent to serve the public interest, and the pharmaceutical companies learned how to maximize this to their greatest benefit. This is part of the unintended consequences. On the other hand, because of the power of the internet, the fact that we can all self-publish our information, and that we have the publishing industry and entrepreneurs like yourself, the public is increasingly better able to evaluate the evidence themselves and make their own conclusions. I am immensely optimistic that the public is figuring out diet and lifestyle is how we become ill, and that's how we become well. I'm also very optimistic that corporate America will also figure out that diet and lifestyle is how we have a healthy workforce or a unhealthy workforce that's neither productive and is also increasingly costly because of the healthcare costs. I remain very optimistic that things will continue to improve. How quickly public policy changes, that I'm a little more pessimistic, but I think the public themselves will be increasingly responsive to the diet and lifestyle message.
I agree, Terry. I think we're both on the same page there. I think with tools such as examine.com, debunking loads of supplements and talking about things like vitamin D and putting the studies into context that show that it is beneficial to a lot of people, I think something's going to come along at some point which is going to be similar to that, but on a larger scale, that's going to try and pool and use big data to put disease and food and diet and everything into perspective across the whole planet, and that's something that we've never had before.
I think it's a wonderfully exciting time. And I'm very mindful, if we had not had the internet, I would not have been able to make the discoveries that I've made, and my own journey from terrible disability to the point where I can now jog 1.25 miles. And more people are going on very similar journeys. To me, this is a wonderfully exciting time.
For sure. Well, on that note then, as a closing question for myself, there's a lot of people out there that they need to turn their lives around 180 degrees like you've done, but not everyone has taken responsibility for that, and not everyone is motivated to do that. Can you give one piece of advice to someone in that kind of circumstance, in that situation, probably like a mindset kind of thing of what they should do and why they should do it?
So in my clinical practice, I generally talk with my patients. I see veterans from the Iraq-Afghanistan war, often with TBI, severe traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, mental health issues, been suffering often for many years. Or I see people with multiple autoimmune problems. They've been suffering for many years. And the pitch I'll use for them is, you've tried conventional approaches for several years now. You're still suffering. Are you willing to give me 3 months of a diet and lifestyle intervention. That's going to be a lot of work just as an experiment to see if this will be helpful in reducing your symptoms. And then I review the Wahls diet, talk about meditative practice and the importance of moving their bodies. And I'm very pleased to say over the 7 years that I've been doing this, the public response has clearly shifted. People are much more interested and open to diet and lifestyle. And when you can put it in the context of this is an experiment, you have the control. You decide what 3 months you're going to do this. Talk with your family, get your whole family on board so it's a family intervention, because that would be far more successful if the whole family does the diet and lifestyle together. I would say the vast, vast majority of my patients are now willing to give this diet and lifestyle intervention a try. And then when I see them back in 3 months, they are invariably reporting better energy, better mood, far less fatigue, much less pain. It's easier to get along with family, with friends, with coworkers. The women are pleased. The weight's falling off without being hungry. And the weight's flying off the guys too, but they're much more excited to tell me that their love life is better and their moods are better. So I sort of chuckle. The women are into body image issues regarding their weight, and the men are much more interested in body performance issues in terms of their love life and sexual performance.
Thanks for the excellent advice. Can you tell us a little bit more about where our audience can find out more about your book and also the other things that you've got going on?
Sure. So if you go to my website, Terry, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com, you can get information about what I'm doing. We have some free videos. We also have downloadable materials for you as well. And we have links to the book, The Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine. And, of course, you can get the book everywhere, at least here in the U.S. I'm not quite sure about the U.K. and Europe. It may be there that you have to go through Amazon.
Excellent. Well, I'll link to all that in the show notes, and I'll also link to your really excellent TED Talk. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, one more thing I want to tell you about. There's going to be a great event managed by Mind, Body, Green, the Revitalize event. And I'll be doing another 20-minute talk that will be fabulous. So I think your audience will probably going to really enjoy this new talk as well.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll put that on the show notes as well. Well, thanks again, Terry, for coming on the show, and thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. Take care.